The morning session at the Providence Municipal Court usually follows a rhythm as steady as the Rhode Island tides. Traffic tickets, zoning disputes, the quiet shuffling of papers under the hum of industrial air conditioning. Judge Frank Caprio sits at the helm, a man who has spent decades listening to the heartbeat of the city, distinguishing between genuine hardship and hollow excuses. Today, the docket is full, but the air changes the moment the heavy oak doors swing open, not with a respectful creak, but with a careless shove. Ethan Hayes enters. He is 22, clad in a leather jacket that costs more than the bailiff's car, with sunglasses pushed up into hair perfectly styled to look messy. He doesn't look for a seat. He scans the room like he's deciding whether to buy the building. Most defendants walk in with their shoulders hunched or eyes downcast, carrying the weight of their citations. Ethan walks in like he's doing the court a favor by showing up at all. He ignores the silent sign, finishing a text message with a smirk before sliding his phone into a pocket, the screen still glowing. Judge Caprio pauses. He adjusts his glasses, his gaze shifting from the file in front of him to the young man striding down the center aisle before his name is even called. The courtroom quiets down. Even the babies in the back row seem to sense the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Ethan Hayes," the clerk announces, her voice tight. She reads the list, and it is not a short one. Reckless driving, 3 counts of parking in a handicap zone, failure to yield, and 2 unpaid speeding tickets from the same weekend. Ethan leans against the defendant's podium, resting an elbow on the wood as if it were a bar counter. He doesn't stand straight. He chews gum with a slow, rhythmic indifference. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Caprio says, his voice calm, the signature rasp of 80 years of wisdom layering every syllable. "You seem quite comfortable, perhaps too comfortable for a man facing 7 citations." Ethan shrugs, a gesture of practiced apathy. "Just here to get this over with, Judge. Let's wrap it up." The judge's eyes narrow slightly. He has seen fear, he has seen anger, and he has seen sorrow. But pure, unadulterated arrogance is a rare vintage in this courtroom, and Frank Caprio knows exactly how to decant it. "In this room," Caprio says, leaning forward, "we do not wrap things up. We seek justice. And looking at this stack of tickets, we have a long road ahead of us this morning." Ethan Hayes leaned his elbows on the mahogany podium, not as a defendant bracing for judgment, but like a patron waiting for a drink at an upscale bar. He tapped a manicured finger against the wood, a rhythm of impatience that echoed in the sudden silence of the municipal courtroom. When the clerk read the first charge, parking in a handicap zone without a permit on Thayer Street, Ethan didn't wait for Judge Caprio to ask for a plea. He simply waved a hand, a dismissive gesture usually reserved for waiters bringing the wrong order. "Look, Judge," Ethan started, his voice carrying a casual, unearned familiarity that made the court officer by the door stiffen. "It wasn't really parking in the traditional sense. I was just existing there for a moment. The engine was running. Technically, the car was still alive, right?" He flashed a practiced grin, expecting the room to share in the cleverness of his loophole. Judge Caprio didn't smile. He adjusted his glasses, peering over the rim, his gaze settling on the young man with the heavy, quiet weight of decades on the bench. "Mr. Hayes," the judge said, his voice low and steady, the kind of tone that usually signals a storm. "The citation says the vehicle was unattended for 45 minutes. That is hardly a pause." Ethan shrugged, checking his watch, a heavy gold chronograph that caught the harsh fluorescent light. "Time is relative when you're running critical errands, Judge. Besides, nobody was using the spot. I figured the city would appreciate me not blocking the narrow lane, but instead, I get a stack of neon paper on my windshield." He chuckled, a hollow sound that grated against the solemnity of the room. "Honestly, I thought those signs were more like suggestions for people who don't know how to handle a vehicle. I didn't think they actually applied to someone who knows what they're doing. It's a victimless crime." The audacity hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A woman in the back row shook her head. The stenographer paused. Judge Caprio picked up the stack of citations, the paper crinkling loudly in the microphone feed. So, your defense is that your perceived competence exempts you from the statutes of providence? Ethan straightened his designer jacket, completely missing the warning tone. I'm just saying, Your Honor. Let's be real. These are just revenue collectors. I'm good for the fine, obviously, but let's not pretend I committed a felony here. It's just a curb. The rules are for traffic flow, not for punishment. Frank Caprio has sat on this bench long enough to recognize the specific geometry of a lie. He doesn't raise his voice, he simply lowers his pen. The courtroom settles into that heavy, expectant silence where the air conditioning hums a little louder and the shuffling of papers sounds like thunder. He looks down at the file, then up at the young man standing before him. The distance between the bench and the podium is only a few feet, but today, it feels like a divide between two different worlds. Mr. Hayes, Caprio begins, his voice gravelly but gentle, possessing the patience of a grandfather who has seen it all before. I'm looking at a driving record here that reads less like a commute and more like a chase scene. Speeding, failure to yield, parking in a restricted zone, all in the span of a week. Ethan Hayes doesn't flinch. He treats the podium like a bar counter, leaning in with a familiarity that hasn't been earned, his posture loose and dismissive. The designer hoodie he wears costs more than the fines he's facing, and his body language screams that he knows it. Honest mistakes, Your Honor, Ethan says, though the smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth suggests honesty is a stranger to him. The signage on 4th Street is practically invisible, and the parking? I was just grabbing a coffee. 2 minutes, tops. It feels like the city is just looking for revenue. Judge Caprio peers over the rim of his spectacles. He isn't buying the coffee defense. He is looking for the character behind the citation. 2 minutes in a handicap zone is 2 minutes too long for someone who actually needs that space, Caprio notes, his tone remaining deceptively conversational. Tell me, Ethan, are you currently working? A student? Who pays for the gas in this car you're driving so aggressively? Ethan waves a hand dismissively, checking his watch as if the question is a bore. I'm taking some time to find myself, he replies, the arrogance radiating off him like heat from pavement. My family supports me. They want me to focus on my future. It is the casual entitlement that catches the judge's ear. The assumption that the world is a waiting room built specifically for Ethan Hayes. Caprio shifts the file, revealing the sheer volume of the stack. So, you are supported, Caprio says, pausing to let the word hang heavy in the air. But being supported and being responsible are two different things. When you saw the officer's lights, Mr. Hayes, what was your first thought? Was it concern? Or was it annoyance that you were being interrupted? Ethan chuckles, a hollow, jarring sound in the wood-paneled room. I thought, here we go again. It feels like harassment, honestly. I wasn't hurting anyone. The gallery shifts uncomfortably. Judge Caprio's expression doesn't change, but the warmth in his eyes cools just a fraction. The inquiry has begun, and the defendant is digging a hole with every word. Judge Caprio adjusts his glasses and nods to the bailiff. Let's hear from the officer who issued the citations. Officer David Chen steps forward from the gallery. He is the antithesis of the young man slouching at the podium. His uniform is immaculate, his stance rooted in discipline. He places a thick manila folder on the bench, the sound of the heavy paper landing with a dull thud that echoes in the sudden silence of the room. Your Honor, Chen begins, his voice steady and devoid of emotion. The defendant wasn't merely parking illegally. We have dashcam footage from the patrol unit and municipal CCTV from the intersection of Broad and Way-Bossett. The large monitor to the judge's left flickers to life. The courtroom watches a grainy but undeniable feed. A sleek, dark sports car tears through a red light, the brake lights never once flaring. On the screen, a pedestrian pushing a stroller freezes in the crosswalk as the vehicle swerves around them with inches to spare. The timestamp reads 2:14 p.m., broad daylight. A collective gasp ripples through the benches behind Ethan. Ethan Hayes rolls his eyes, leaning his elbows heavily on the mahogany rail as if bored by a tedious lecture. Okay, look, the light was definitely yellow when I entered the intersection, he interjects, his voice dripping with annoyance. And that lady? She wasn't even close. You're making this dramatic for no reason. Officer Chen does not flinch. He ignores the outburst completely, sliding a glossy photograph across the bench toward Frank Caprio. Exhibit B, Your Honor. This is the defendant's vehicle parked in a handicap spot at the Veterans Hospital, blocking the wheelchair ramp for 45 minutes while the defendant picked up lunch. Judge Caprio picks up the photo, his expression hardening. The image is stark, the luxury car straddling the blue lines, an arrogant obstacle to those who served. I was just grabbing takeout, Ethan snaps again, cutting off the officer before the judge can speak. I was gone for 5 minutes tops. Nobody needed the spot. You guys are acting like I committed a felony over a sandwich. Frank Caprio lowers the photo slowly to the desk. He looks over the rim of his glasses, the grandfatherly warmth that usually defines his court evaporating into cold steel. Mr. Hayes, the judge says, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with authority. You are interrupting a sworn officer of the law who is presenting objective facts. You will remain silent until it is your turn to speak. Ethan huffs, crossing his arms, a smirk playing on his lips, as if the proceedings are merely a suggestion he can decline. But the evidence continues to mount. Speeding tickets in school zones, unpaid tolls, and a blatant disregard for public safety captured in high definition. The screen doesn't lie, even if the defendant thinks he can talk his way around the truth. The evidence on the monitor, Officer Chen's time-stamped photos of the sleek coupe straddling the pedestrian crosswalk, flickers and holds. It is an unblinking mechanical witness that strips away the veneer of, "It wasn't me." The silence in the courtroom stretches thin, taut as a wire. Ethan Hayes stops looking at the screen. He realizes the factual battle is lost, the geometry of the law is against him. So, he decides to fight a different war, one of status. He brushes an invisible speck of dust from his tailored sleeve, a gesture of dismissal that screams louder than a shout. He looks up at the bench, his expression shifting from defensive to conspiratorial, as if he and the judge are the only two rational men in a room full of petty bureaucrats. Your Honor, Ethan begins, his tone changing. The frantic denial is gone, replaced by a smooth, practiced confidence. I think we're missing the forest for the trees here. We're spending taxpayer money analyzing tire angles and timestamps. He pauses, waiting for a nod that doesn't come. Judge Caprio remains still, his face a mask of patient curiosity, though his eyes sharpen behind his glasses. He has seen this pivot before. It is the moment the desperate man reaches for a shield he didn't earn. My grandfather is Colonel Richard Hayes, Ethan says, dropping the name like a heavy gold coin on a glass table. Retired U.S. Army. Decoration for Valor in '72. The name ripples through the older folks in the gallery. Heads turn. The colonel is a local legend, a pillar of Providence. Ethan sees the recognition and leans into it. He spent 30 years defending the freedoms this court operates on. I was raised in a house where service matters. Judge Caprio interlaces his fingers, leaning back slightly. I know the colonel, the judge says, his voice even, giving nothing away. I know him very well. Ethan smiles, a reflex of premature victory. Then you understand, he says, spreading his hands as if the case is already closed. My grandfather didn't lead battalions, so his grandson could be harassed by patrolmen over a yellow line. It's about professional courtesy. It's about respect for the name. Ethan leans forward, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur that the microphone amplifies mercilessly for the entire room. Frankly, Judge, people from my family, we shouldn't have these kinds of problems. We don't belong in a cattle call for parking tickets. It's insulting to his legacy to drag me through this." The statement hangs in the air, toxic and heavy. In the back row, a man in a faded navy cap stiffens visibly. Officer Chen looks at the floor, embarrassed not for himself, but for the sheer audacity on display. Ethan Hayes has just tried to cash a check written in his grandfather's blood, expecting it to buy him the right to break the law. He stands there, chin up, waiting for the gavel to bang in his favor, completely unaware that he has just insulted the very principle Judge Caprio holds most dear. The air in the courtroom didn't just cool, it froze. Ethan Hayes stood there, chin high, waiting for the magic words, "Retired Colonel," to dissolve the citations like sugar in hot coffee. Instead, Judge Caprio slowly removed his reading glasses and placed them on the mahogany bench with a deliberate, quiet clatter. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, drowning out the hum of the ventilation. When Frank Caprio speaks in that low, gravelly register, it carries more weight than any gavel strike ever could. "Young man," the judge began, his eyes narrowing not in anger, but in a piercing disappointment that seemed to fill the entire room. "You invoke your grandfather's rank as if it is a shield for your arrogance. You think his service gives you permission to ignore the laws he fought to uphold." The judge leaned forward, clasping his hands, looking past the expensive clothes and the defiant posture. "I have sat on this bench for decades. I have seen veterans stand exactly where you are standing. Men who lost limbs, men who saw hell, and they apologize for a parking ticket because they respect the system. They understand duty." Caprio pointed a finger, not at Ethan, but at the flag standing still in the corner, its gold fringe catching the fluorescent light. "Your grandfather didn't wear that uniform so his grandson could drive recklessly through the streets of Providence. He wore it to protect the rule of law. When you break these rules and then hide behind his name, you aren't honoring him. You are tarnishing his legacy." Ethan shifted his weight, the designer hoodie suddenly feeling heavy on his shoulders. The smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine uncertainty. Caprio wasn't done. "My father was a milkman. He didn't have stripes on his shoulder, but he taught me that character is what you do when no one is watching. You, Mr. Hayes, demand special treatment because of who your family is. But in this room, the only thing that matters is who you are. And right now, you are showing us a young man who thinks he is above the very community his grandfather served." The lecture wasn't a shout. It was a mirror. And for the first time, Ethan didn't like the reflection staring back at him. Judge Caprio aligns the photographs on the bench like a losing hand of cards. Officer Chen's body cam footage is paused on the screen, a frozen image of Ethan's sports car blocking a handicap ramp, the license plate glaring under the flash. The silence in the courtroom isn't empty. It is heavy, filled with the weight of accumulated facts. Ethan Hayes shifts his weight, the expensive fabric of his jacket rustling, a sound that seems too loud in the sudden quiet. The bravado that carried him through the doors is beginning to fracture under the scrutiny of the lens. "Mr. Hayes," the judge begins, his voice dropping to that low, resonant register that commands more attention than a shout. "You stood there and told me this was a misunderstanding. You told me your grandfather's rank should serve as your defense." Caprio taps the stack of citations with a single finger. But Officer Chen didn't write tickets to a rank. He wrote them to a driver who believes the road is his private driveway. The judge picks up the first photo. Tuesday, 2 p.m., blocking a fire hydrant. He picks up the second. Wednesday, rush hour, weaving through school zone traffic. He lays them down one by one. It is a relentless cadence of negligence. This isn't a mistake, son. This is a lifestyle. You aren't just breaking rules. You are dismantling the safety of your neighbors. Ethan opens his mouth, perhaps to mention the colonel again, but Caprio raises a hand, palm out, stopping the words before they form. "I know generals and I know privates," Caprio says, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto the young man. And the one thing they all fought for was a system where the law applies to the prince and the pauper equally. When you use your grandfather's name to evade a speeding ticket, you aren't honoring his service. You are cheapening it. The air in the room changes. The gallery, usually restless, is still. The evidence is insurmountable. It is no longer he said, she said. It is the undeniable truth of behavior printed on glossy paper. Your name might open doors at the country club, Caprio concludes, closing the file with a definitive thud that echoes off the wood paneling. But in this chamber, the only currency that matters is accountability. And right now, your account is overdrawn. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted tectonically. The casual murmur of the gallery died out completely, leaving only the low hum of the ventilation system and the sharp, rhythmic tapping of Judge Frank Caprio's finger against the heavy wood of the bench. It was a sound that signaled the end of patience. Ethan Hayes, who had spent the morning leaning back with the casual indifference of a prince in exile, suddenly found the air in the room thin. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply leaned forward, clasping his hands together, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses with a piercing clarity that stripped away the young man's bravado. "You stand there," Caprio began, his voice steady and resonant, carrying to the back rows without effort, wearing your family name like it is a suit of armor. You threw your grandfather's rank onto this floor expecting it to shatter the evidence against you. You think the title of colonel is a currency you can spend to buy your way out of accountability. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer another deflection, but the look on the judge's face stopped the words in his throat. The veteran in the front row nodded slowly, recognizing the tone of a commanding officer addressing a subordinate who had lost his way. "Let me explain to you what that rank means in the real world, Mr. Hayes," Caprio continued, the tempo of his speech slowing for emphasis. "It means service. It means sacrifice. It means waking up before the sun to protect the liberties of strangers. It means adhering to a code of conduct so strict that it defines your very existence. Your grandfather earned that respect through decades of discipline. He did not earn it so his grandson could treat the public roadways as a private playground." The judge picked up the stack of citations Officer Chen had provided, the photos of the blocked hydrant, the reckless turn, the speeding ticket, and held them up. To Ethan, they no longer looked like paper. They looked like an indictment of his character. "When you break these laws and then hide behind a veteran service," Caprio said, his tone dropping an octave, heavy with moral authority, "you aren't honoring him. You are insulting him. You are mocking the very system of order he fought to preserve. You confuse legacy with luxury, son. You think you are special because of whose blood you share, but in this chamber, under that flag, the only thing that distinguishes you is your integrity. And right now, that account is overdrawn." For the first time since entering the municipal court, the smirk fell from Ethan's face. His designer jacket suddenly seemed too large, his posture less assured. He looked down at his shoes, the confident gleam in his eyes replaced by the flickering shadow of genuine anxiety. The reality of the situation, that the rules actually applied to him and that his grandfather's name was a standard to live up to, not a coupon to redeem, was finally crashing down. The air in the courtroom changes. It is no longer the charged atmosphere of a debate, but the heavy, suffocating silence of realization. Judge Caprio's words about the colonel's true legacy, service, sacrifice, and humility hang over the bench like a physical weight. For the first time since walking through the mahogany doors, Ethan Hayes does not look like the master of his universe. The smirk that had been plastered on his face, as permanent as the designer logo on his chest, finally begins to dissolve. He shifts his weight, not with the restless energy of impatience, but with the awkward discomfort of someone who suddenly feels very small under the fluorescent lights. Ethan glances toward the back of the room, perhaps looking for an exit or an imaginary ally, but finds neither. When his eyes return to the bench, They meet Frank Caprio's unwavering gaze. The judge isn't shouting, he isn't lecturing anymore. He is simply waiting. The silence stretches, forcing Ethan to fill it. Ethan starts, his voice cracking slightly, lacking that polished arrogance from 10 minutes ago. He clears his throat, the sound echoing in the quiet chamber. I didn't think it would be like this. I guess I thought my grandfather's name meant I didn't have to worry about the small stuff. It is a clumsy admission, half-formed and hesitant. The courtroom regulars, Inspector Quinn by the railing, the clerk organizing files, the quiet gallery, lean in. This is the pivot point. Ethan looks down at his hands, gripping the sides of the podium until his knuckles whiten. I wasn't trying to disrespect the uniform, he adds, glancing briefly, almost fearfully at Officer Chen. I'm used to things going my way. I didn't think I was hurting anyone. Judge Caprio does not smile. He does not immediately offer absolution or a grandfatherly nod. He leans forward, interlacing his fingers, studying the young man with the precision of a jeweler inspecting a rough stone for flaws. He is looking for the vital difference between regret and fear. Mr. Hayes, Caprio says, his voice low and resonant, cutting through the young man's stammering. Apologies are easy when the bill comes due. Anyone can say they are sorry when they see the cliff edge. But I need to know if you are sorry because you were caught, or because you finally understand that you were wrong. There is a world of difference between the two, and that difference will decide how you walk out of this room today. The courtroom air, previously charged with the static of entitlement, now hangs heavy with expectation. Judge Caprio picks up the stack of citations, weighing them in his hand, not just as paper, but as a measure of character. Ethan Hayes stands alone at the podium, the phantom weight of his grandfather's rank no longer shielding him, but casting a long, demanding shadow. Ethan, Judge Caprio says, his voice dropping to that register that commands absolute silence without raising a decibel. I have thought about your grandfather. I have thought about the men and women who salute that uniform. They follow orders so that society can function. You broke laws because you thought you were above function. The judge writes deeply on the docket, the scratch of the pen echoing like a chisel on stone. I am imposing the maximum fine allowed by statute for the reckless driving and the parking violations. Your wallet will feel this. He looks up, locking eyes with the young man. But money is easy. Time is hard. I am ordering 100 hours of community service. And I don't want you filing papers in air conditioning. I want you cleaning the Veterans Memorial Park. A ripple moves through the gallery. It is poetic justice, forced to maintain the legacy he tried to exploit. Ethan swallows hard, nodding slowly. The arrogance has evaporated, replaced by the sobering reality of labor. You told me you were a colonel's grandson, Caprio continues, leaning back. Now go out there and prove you are worthy of the name. Not by flashing a badge, but by sweating for your community. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Ethan whispers, his voice finally stripped of pretense. Good. Then we have a deal. Judge Caprio hands the file to the clerk. I wish you good luck, young man. Don't let me see you here again unless you're shaking my hand. Ethan turns, walking out not with a swagger, but with a heavy step. The door closes. Caprio adjusts his glasses, glances at Officer Chen with a subtle nod, and calls the next name. The rules, invisible but ironclad, remain unbroken.